We're going to talk about revolutionizing procurement for 10x efficiency and impact. And I'm delighted to be joined by Lisa Martin, the CPO of global pharmaceutical company GSK. So thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
And Matthias Dohrn, the president of procurement at global chemical company BASF.
Thank you.
Matthias, thank you. So the first question, I'm going to pose this question first to you, Lisa. Obviously, the topic of the conversation is around 10x procurement. So I'd like to know, what does 10x procurement mean to you? And how does that kind of influence how you think about procurement?
So thanks. 10x procurement. Well, I think about 10x as a mindset, I think, first of all. Secondly, enabled by all the wonderful tool sets that are out there. But really, for me, it isn't 10x just for procurement. It's what this new way of working and thinking can do for our company's objectives. We have very ambitious goals as a company, and I think about 10x as how can procurement working in our business really enable our already ambitious goals to get delivered faster.
Matthias.
I would totally agree with Lisa. I think also for us, it's all about speed. But when you look at it, it's for us AI, a big topic, which will really fundamentally change certain things. I think the speed of development is incredible. I think it's more ecosystems. So how can you, within your value chain, really get closer together, enable more exchange, really get the innovations we haven't done in the past? And of course, it's also how do you run projects differently within procurement, because I think we are very static still, but I think we need to be much, much more dynamic.
Now, you're both in very different industries, so how do you think about 10x in terms of how that's specifically applicable to the goals that you have that are unique to your industry? And Matthias, I'll just start with you on that one.
For us, of course, when you look at the chemical industry, all gray-based, so our raw materials are gray, all the energy is gray. So for us, it's decarbonization, really find a way to reduce the carbon footprint with scope 3.1 emissions, but also in the production processes radically over the next year. So there, it's more than 10x what we actually need to get down year over year. So that's for us one of the big challenges. And there, I think sustainability, decarbonizing specifically for the chemical industry, a huge task.
And just to follow up on that, do you feel like because those are such big challenges for our organizations as a whole, but obviously procurement is an enabler of that, does that require kind of 10x thinking because it's to do something that's not been done before?
Absolutely right. So it means for us we need to change the whole supply chain. Today we call it a shell or somebody and say we need your oil, overly simplified. In the future it will be more plant-based oils, it will be more recycling, it will be much smaller sources. So you need to develop those markets really to decarbonize, and their procurement plays the instrumental role.
And Lisa, how do you think specifically around 10x in terms of how that applies in the pharmaceutical industry?
Well, though our sectors are different, I think decarbonization and AI, just generally speaking, is everywhere, right? I don't think it's very sector specific. You know, in our company, GSK, we've been working on, before anyone knew what Gen AI was, we have an R&D unit that was set up 7 years ago to do AI in our R&D. So it's a thread that's running in every part of the company. So our goal in procurement, first of all, we need to upskill some of our folks. So in terms of, the knowledge base that we have, they can then add value, lean in. And then there's a risk component that I think we'll get to a little bit later in the conversation about how is procurement playing a role in the risk that AI brings, because there's a real upside, but there's also a risk that we have to be aware of. 10x, I mean, for me, I love this concept of innovation, speed, breakthrough. I still think we have to bring people along the journey, and I think that doesn't change. I mean, change management, how you bring people along, I think it's going to change the way we work for sure, but fundamentally, if you don't engage your staff, your people, your suppliers in the journey, you're not going to get there.
Yeah, and business stakeholders is another one that you've got to bring on with the journey. So it's all well and good thinking, we're going to 10x the impact of procurement, but for why? So how do you think about kind of setting the goals of what procurement evolution and procurement change looks like in a way that is supporting specific requirements of the business? At least I'll ask you that one first.
I actually go the other way. So my thinking is understanding the most strategic imperatives of the company, understanding our culture and our values. What do we need to do differently? So I tend to think about the business first and procurement a second in a way, not in a disrespectful way, but if I don't understand the larger context of what's important. So for GSK, we've got 12 major products we're going to launch by 2026. I need to understand both the geography of that, the science of that, the challenges of that across the whole value chain. So that's R&D, manufacturing, commercial, et cetera, and create that ecosystem, to Matthias's point, both internally and externally to support that.
And same question really to you, Matthias, from a BASF perspective. How do you bring the stakeholders, how do you bring your the leadership of BASF kind of along the ride to make sure that the investments that you're making are the investments the business needs?
I think when you look at procurement, we have been static. Yeah, because there wasn't a need, you have had your sources, et cetera, and now with the decarbonization, but also with those new supply chains which you have to develop, with green energy which you have to buy around the globe, that of course becomes much more strategic for the company, and therefore we are much more often in the board asking for investments. So we also invest in procurement, we buy participations in companies, et cetera, so that has changed dramatically for us.
We've talked about mindset and the impact of mindset of 10x procurement, but it requires a lot of experimentation. I wonder if you could share, Lisa, first of all, how you think about how do we quickly test new ideas to determine, okay, this is what we need to invest more time in, versus, you know what, we tried this, not sure it's going to work, let's move on to the next thing. But do that in a quick way, so we're not spending all of our time, 3 years down the line, we're looking, we tried 1 or 2 things.
So I think, a few years ago, we all talked about agile. Agile was sort of the buzzword about, working in an agile way. I think now the reality is we're living it. We're doing a lot of POVs or POCs, point of value, point of concepts. We're experimenting, and we're doing it in small scale, right? We're not doing large scale implementations of anything while we learn. And then we're adapting what we think is the most viable business case and then bringing that forward. I think in the company, we've done that probably more so in the R&D and commercial parts of the company, where we've really focused on omni-channel, some of these breakthrough ideas, which have helped us try to get better customer insights, better connection with our patients and our stakeholders.
And how do you select, where are the areas to actually focus on experimentation?
Whether we like it or not, we do surveys all the time about our systems and processes in GSK, and we are very clear about what our pain points are. We have our company, the industry segment that I'm in is highly regulated. So we've probably been our own worst enemy in some cases about building clunky bureaucratic processes, and our end users and our suppliers are telling us that. So we've been focused, quite frankly, on our experiments, not so much about, I am focusing on what my procurement professionals need to be, more effective in their jobs, more efficient, but we've really dialed up our whole listening of user experience, what it means for the users, both our internal shoppers and our suppliers. And then we're experimenting on those highest pain points.
So you're finding whether you're solving problems as opposed to just looking and saying, well, this sounds nice, let's try and experiment with it.
We are definitely trying to, we are solving problems, yes.
Matthias, how do you think about
we do it right the same, like Lisa said, we also make trials, quick trials, and then learn whether this really makes sense to roll it out for the company. And when you ask me where do you get your inspiration, is of course you have a long list where people say we can actually improve here and there and there. And then I think DPW, what we do here to connect with startups, etc., gives you a good hint on what is actually possible, where is the industry going through, and then we make meetings, calls afterwards, and see whether this really fits to our problems.
And how much of that experimentation is about the technology and how much of it is about the change management?
I think it's 80% change, 20% technology, but I think it's also about processes.
Yeah.
So if you have, I once wrote on a dash, PP plus NT equals EPP, and PP is poor processes plus new technology equals expensive poor processes. So therefore, I think there you always have to watch out because that can become extremely expensive.
Well, and I think it's about fit for purpose, right? Like you can design something that's very high end, but do you really need it? So, I mean, we've been going through a big transformation with our third-party risk management approach and program. We're trying to get it to be life cycle management, and it's a very hard problem to crack, especially where we put a lot of onus on business accountability, business owner accountability. But I think some of the new tools will help us get there. So I think it's process. Yes, you need the money for the technology, so I do think that getting funding is important, right? And then the change, bringing people along the journey, and also listening. I really think decades ago, I would take a small group of procurement leaders and say, okay, this is what we need for the function. I think that's really changed. I think it's what does the company need, what are our stakeholders telling us, what are suppliers telling us, and what's the next frontier? Whether that's 10X or not, I'll take the DPW branding, but I think that's how thinking has changed.
Does being agile also mean that you're making smaller bets? So you're not going in with, okay, here's a huge business case for a huge transformation, but we're going to make a smaller one. We're going to do it iteratively. Then we're going to double down on the ones that work.
Then we'll scale.
But I also think when I was a long time ago in procurement and I tried the suite. Yeah, huge procurement suite for everybody, huge IT project, and we factually didn't make it because I think it's very difficult to have one solution if you have everything from logistics, packaging, all direct materials, indirect materials, everything from the pen to the chemical plant. Yeah. So and I think I think you need to test smaller because the problems you have are very often very category specific, and the compromises are too big if you look for a suite.
So how do you think about managing that complexity then? Because that breeds more complexity because you have more systems.
That's, I think, the thing we have to solve. But I think the value which you get out with specific solutions is much higher than a bit more complexity management.
I think the upside to that is I see a lot better collaboration and integration with our tech colleagues who support us. I think that world has really changed. Maybe not that the power balance has shifted, but I think we're really aligned in a much better way now, working together to figure out, what is the fit for purpose, because one size just definitely doesn't fit all. And and even in different geographies, we're in 70 different countries, right? Like we can't have the same solution for 35 people in a small country that we're going to have in the US or the UK.
No, it's funny how we've evolved, where we went down this path. We were talking a little bit backstage about, you go down this path of standardization, and that was kind of the 2010s, and now you realize, well, there isn't, yes, you can't do standardization because every organization truly is different. And, at one point that looked like it was an excuse, oh, I'm different, my company's different, I can't do that. Well, the reality is that every company needs something different from their procurement organization, and so you have to have that ability to customize as much as you can.
Yes, we've learned all about our personas, our different personas.
I'm happy to hear that you're looking at personas and doing journey mapping, then I imagine that is connected with those different personas.
Yeah.
How, Elisa, I'll ask you this first. How are you actually then making changes to your operating model to make it more agile?
Well, it's a constant evolution of our operating model. So I would say we started this journey at GSK because we separated our consumer company, and before we did that, we transformed. We set up our centers in both Poland and India, but now we're evolving that. So I think there's a lot of change that are happening in terms of the scope of the work that we're putting in the centers, as well as category management. We were having a discussion about category management. I don't want to think category management's dead, but it wasn't what it was. So you have to be much more nimble. Knowledge management, we talked about in the old days, right? Category managers were really recognized and rewarded for going after the biggest dollars in the biggest countries. But then you had unintended consequences with your tail spend. So now we're kind of changing our mindset to say, no, you're responsible for everything, every bit of spend in your category around the world. But you have to then engage category down and site up. So it is really changing the way we're working. I don't think it will stop. I don't think it will stop evolving.
So does that mean then you're basically giving category managers a suite of tools within which to manage that spend, but you're not necessarily directing, it's not, as we said before, it's not necessarily one size fits all, but you have a tool here that can manage that portion of your spend, you've got a tool here that can manage that portion. You can't just focus on that and kind of leave the rest to a buyer in some location somewhere. Correct. And not worry about it.
Right, or the buyer in that location thinks somebody else is worrying about it. That's probably more practical, the reality. So we are just really starting to bring this concept to light at the company, and it's going to take some time, I have to say, because people have been rewarded under a different system.
Yeah. Matthias, how are you thinking about your operating model?
Yeah, we have started actually already, I think a year now ago, a little more than a year, because you have normally all those categories with your spend then going down. And as Lisa said, you always focus on the top, because this is the shiny, beautiful one. And we turned this actually around and put the sites on top.
Yeah.
So we are really going into the sites, into plants. So Ludwigshafen, for example, we currently go through 150 or 135 plants. We do workshops, and we analyze the spend before we go into the plant, and then we tackle really every spend category, have joint workshops and say, how can we reduce the spend?
Exactly.
And then we have, I think in Ludwigshafen alone, collected so far close to 2,000 measures, which we then track. And this can be, we have a drum press. Instead of giving the drums somewhere else, we press them and sell the scrap metal end. So really smart ideas where not always procurement can do it alone, but where you need the business jointly, and how can you restructure the spend. I think that's for us currently a big topic.
Yeah, it's kind of a 180 from the, I'm going to build a global category strategy, and the global category strategy is going to cover 70 or 80% of my spend, and the 20% that it doesn't, we're not worried about that.
And I think that 20% you need to tackle when you want to go to 10x, and you really want to have an impact on the company, that you need to tackle to really get the cost down.
We've learned too, there's also a risk with that 20% if nobody's looking at it, right? There's a risk component to it that may be higher than the value of the 20%.
Absolutely. It's funny how we used to look at tail spend as just being the spend number, but that's where some of our more strategic spend can actually sit. And when you just look at 80-20, you miss so much of that strategic spend. In fact, I could make an argument that all spend is strategic in some way, shape or form to somebody. But when we just looked at 80-20, we kind of forgot about that as if it wasn't strategic, and that's where what a risk is as well.
Exactly.
Now, we talked at the beginning around how 10x is also a mindset. You're both in very large organizations, you've got large procurement teams. Matthias, I'll ask this to you first. How do you kind of scale mindset? How do you scale a 10x mindset within your team?
I think we have just announced a new strategy, the winning ways strategy, and there it's very much about speed. Yeah, because I think we are, as a big company, too slow, and it takes too long. We are socializing decisions, etc. So there we just need to get back to a level where it makes more sense, and then you need to certainly reward that. Mm-hmm. So risk taking needs to make sense for you as an individual, and there we're doing a hell of a lot currently also in procurement. So we have those sessions where risk taking makes more sense, and we also have increased the perks.
How do you create a safe space for your teams to be comfortable in experimentation, especially within, I think about procurement, we're a relatively conservative profession that doesn't like to take risks because we're here to help mitigate risks for our organizations.
So the guy who's responsible for this sits in the first row, and he and me normally I very much like IT. I like innovation since I started at BASF and before already also at my own company. So therefore we always look for new ideas and how can we do this better. And I think you need to have a fable also for that in management. Yeah. And I think we are lucky that the two of us, I think, have really a fable for it.
Kind of leading from the front. Lisa, how do you think about scaling the mindset element of 10x?
Well, I rely on the company, honestly. So I'm not reinventing the wheel here. So we have a very clear culture at GSK where we're ambitious for patients, accountable for impact, and we're always doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. And we introduced, and I think, we introduced better decision making. We were also very slow for making decisions. We have something called DIA and SPATM. I'm using those tools. And I'm trying, with myself and my leadership team, we're trying to role model what good looks like. The whole company is doing that. We have senior leaders that come together a few times a year, once in person, often virtually. And we have very open conversations with the CEO and the leadership team and the top 200 leaders about what's working, what isn't working. So I'm not trying to invent something in procurement that isn't part of the broader GSK culture. I don't think that would be right. There's no need to reinvent that. Mm-hmm. I think there's always a way of having those tough conversations. We were talking a little bit about that. We should probably share some of that example. That was interesting. So, sometimes you do have to have a tough conversation with a very senior stakeholder, a very senior supplier. I think there's a way of doing that, in a positive tone that's hard. But I mean, you also have to give people a bit of time because change is a process and everybody gets there at a different point. I think most importantly is listening.
Yeah.
And knowing your team, knowing where they are and making sure you feel connected, especially for the procurement team, we're very geographically dispersed, right? So I do my best to connect with people whenever I'm traveling or virtually. I think that's the most important.
Because I would love to add something on top. I think when you look at procurement, you factually need hunters. Yeah, you don't need farmers. Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you come in the morning and you want to avoid conflict, then this is certainly the wrong job for you. Yeah. So therefore, I think people need to bring a certain mindset into this role.
Yeah.
And then you need to be money driven. Yeah, because I always go home happily when I have done something which brings the company money. Yeah, or I have fought for something which then, I listened before on stage here, and I think procurement is one of the coolest jobs you can have. Yeah, when you are on the sales side, you always have a product manager or a marketing manager or somebody else who tells you what to do. In procurement, you can decide a hell of a lot yourself. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can create a hell of a lot. So therefore, I think the mindset of procurement people should really be this more entrepreneurial, heart-driven, and money-focused. And I think this hasn't changed.
Well, I've always thought procurement was the best profession, as many of you know, who've known me for so long. But, my proof of that is both of my children, who are now adults, are both in procurement, but versus my husband, who is in sales. But the reality is, I think now, with the precipice of all of this new capability, it really will allow us to take those bold procurement people that are not, the tool sets that they'll have. I'm really hoping that it unlocks even more capacity and people feel safe. I do think creating that safe space is important, because if not, they won't want to, they'll be a little reticent to experiment. So we're all for that.
We talked a little bit right at the beginning about AI and how AI is a part of certainly, AI is around us here at DPW24 for sure, in terms of a lot of the providers out there. We've been talking about AI, for a number of years, but it's really picked up speed the last couple of years. I wonder if you, Matthias, first of all, could just talk about how you think about AI and how it can help you and your procurement team, elevate your impact, 10x your impact.
So I think principally at the beginning, everybody said, okay, is it really coming? Is it really that good? Is that good? And I think it will make a huge difference for us from a data point of view. And of course, you have different applications within procurement. We're currently looking into, for example, claims management, how to make that much, much easier. We look into, of course, legal, so that you check all your contracts before they go out, but also in categories, and we discussed it before, like legal fees should reduce by 40 to 50%. Yeah, marketing campaign fees should reduce by 40%. Yeah, so I think there are certain quick wins which you now have to harvest because it's time. Yeah. And then AI, I think when you look at the maturity level of a lot of solutions, and I think not yet there, but with a fast development, I think they will be there soon. And when you are then first, you will leverage also first. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's again about speed, as Lisa said, to then really leverage this. Because if you are the first one, you get the big margin, you get the savings potential, you will then have a huge leap until the rest comes after you, and then you need to innovate.
So Lisa, does risk tolerance impact then the decision on, are we as an organization ready to embrace AI, or is it something that we're actually going to start looking at building ourselves, the kind of the make versus buy calculation?
So both. We are doing a lot internally with AI, and procurement was at the forefront of helping write the AI policy and set up the AI governance. We're not leading that, but we're a very, very active participant. I think there has been some tension in the organization that our original preference, because we've invested in a very robust data lake and tools. So we're doing both. We're doing some internal makes where we're doing POVs, but we're not stopping. We're kind of parallel pathing to look at the external solutions and then decide which is best, because we don't want to lose time. So we're kind of going dual path, and then we'll decide. But we do have quite a robust risk profile around our AI solution development internally. And then we've done some work, which I would encourage all of you to do, from both a risk and a value, to understand your categories where those suppliers that you're utilizing will start using AI themselves. And you should have those discussions, right? Both about sharing the value that they may unlock, but also if you have data going back and forth, where's those risk points, both for the supplier and for your company?
Matthias, we talked about sustainability and climate control as being kind of one of the challenges for us to solve for, and that may require the 10x thinking. Does that then require cross-industry collaboration? So it's more than just what we can do as an organization, but to truly drive 10x change, do we need to kind of think bigger than just our own companies?
Yeah, I think when you look at it, I mean, finally, you can differentiate your product today, its price, its quality, and its availability. Yeah. So in the future, you will have CO2, low, mid. So you have 50 shades of green. Yeah. Then you have recyclables, renewables, etc. So you have a lot more price determining points in your price making. And there, of course, procurement has to enable that. So we need to see down the supply chain what is actually, because when we buy a product, 70% is in principle 3.1. Yeah, so the scope 1 and 2 and scope 3 of our supplier. And that, of course, trickles down. So you need to have the visibility on that chain. You need to have the standards to define that. Because if I'm an end consumer customer or a customer of BASF's end product, I want to be sure that this PCF is a real PCF. Yeah. I'm not paying for averages more. Yeah, so to get the real PCF through the chain is actually the biggest endeavor we are currently looking into. And there we are more going for ecosystems. So where you have the whole ecosystem, the whole chemical industry, like Catena X for the automotive industry, where then people connect their data. Yep. And then in that ecosystem, you can more or less get your PCF for your product, but the data is then individually caught up in the ecosystem, and you don't have one force, so it's decentral, etc.
Do you see that that's something within the pharma industry as well, that you're now
Absolutely.
looking at challenges and problems on a cross-industry basis?
So we say that we want to democratize sustainability. Yeah. So within our sector, though we may be competitors, we are absolutely collaborating. We have two industry known public entities out there. One is called Energize, where we've been able to enroll ourselves and our suppliers in order to do PPAs, which is very difficult for some suppliers or smaller companies without the scale or the capability. And then we have another one that we've started called Activate, which is focusing on active pharmaceutical ingredients. Most of those are made in India and China. So we have many of the pharma companies working together collaboratively to help the whole ecosystem, because the more they do on their scope 1 and 2, the more it helps us in scope 3, right? So it's all connected.
Well, I know it's about time for us to wrap up. So first of all, I want to thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Matthias, for sharing some of your experiences and perspectives with the audience today. Thank you all for joining us as well for this conversation. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.